Personally, I am a huge fan of oversized, over-the-top megalomaniac monuments and buildings. Visiting them always gives me a sense of fascination, even if I personally disagree with the ideology behind them. And as it so happens, I live in Germany, a country with quite a number of megalomaniac monuments from multiple time periods to boast, but especially from the times of the Kaiserreich. Now, compared to other European countries, the German Empire seems to have had quite a bit of an addiction when it comes to the construction of monuments. You probably know the hundreds of Bismarck towers and statues of various local rulers. But then there were also the bigger, much more impressive national monuments, which we will focus on during this video. In fact, there were so many of these monuments that some contemporaries, such as the philosopher Max Schassler, spoke of a Denkmalwut, or monument mania. But why were there so many of them? When Germany became one single country in 1871, it was pretty much only unified in name. It wasn't a centralized state, but rather a loose confederation of some 22 smaller states. Many of its inhabitants preferred to identify themselves with their local area, rather than the Kaiserreich. After all, it was an empire that was formed with military means under the leadership of Prussia, instead of a common nationwide desire. This was an issue that would often lead to unresolved conflicts during the empire's entire existence, especially with its Catholic population and with its working class. In a sense, one could argue that the German had to be created first. The Kaiserreich didn't have an official national flag until 1892, when Kaiser Wilhelm II officially turned the admittedly uncreative flag of the North German Confederation into the national flag. It also didn't have a national anthem, as the ever-beloved Heil dir im Siegerkranz was more of a Prussian folk song that was played during ceremonies with the Kaiser. The euphoria that some Germans felt after the victory over France didn't last very long. After a very short period of economic boom, the economy sort of took a nosedive after the financial crash of 1873 and entered a long period of stagnation. On top of that, Bismarck's highly unpopular campaigns against the Catholics and the Social Democrats threatened to damage the internal integration. As such, it was crucial to conserve the seemingly glorious events of 1871 forever, and to give the empire the legitimacy that it so desperately needed. The countless monuments were one way with which a sentiment of cooperation and national belonging was supposed to be created. Obviously, it was also an effective way for the Hohenzollern dynasty to show that they were the ones in charge. So many monuments were built in the empire's 47-year-long history that we won't manage to cover them all today. Therefore, I will focus on some of the more interesting and impressive ones, starting with the Victory Column in Berlin.
Du mein Berlin, Berlin, du Perle an der Spree, wer dich erst kennt, Berlin.
Today, the Victory Column stands in one of Berlin's largest gardens, the Tiergarten, right in the middle of a 6-lane road that leads to the famous Brandenburg Gate. Initially, however, it stood on the Königsplatz, right next to the Reichstag. The conception for this monument began in 1864, after Prussia's victory over Denmark. During the planning and building phase, however, 2 more wars were fought and eventually won. Now the column was to become the very first national monument of a united Germany, and show the alleged superiority over its neighbouring countries, rather than just a celebration of Prussia's military. On the 2nd of September 1873, so on the 3rd anniversary of the Battle of Sedan, the Victory Column was finally opened to the public. At the top there's a gold-plated bronze statue of the Roman goddess of victory, Victoria, wearing a Prussian helmet. How very fitting. In 3 rows you can find 60 gold-plated cannons, which were stolen from the Danes, the Austrians and the French. Each of the rectangular base's sides is decorated with a bronze relief depicting one major battle of the Unification Wars. It was a monument of aggression and chauvinism, obviously, and as such it wasn't very popular with everyone. The American author Mark Twain, for instance, wrote that the statue at the top was one of the most unpleasant angels I have ever met. After the end of the German Empire, there were some plans on how to redesign the now renamed Republic Square, but they never came into fruition. A lot changed about it in the 1930s, however. As part of his megalomaniac plans to turn Berlin into Germania, Albert Speer had the Victory Column removed from its original position and taken to the Tiergarten. Speer also decided to make it just a tiny bit taller and to make the base a bit wider. In the end, however, it was not Albert Speer who would have the pleasure of redesigning the city of Berlin, but British bombers. Miraculously, the victory column remained virtually undamaged. This allowed Captain Antoni Jabłoński to raise the Polish flag over it on the 2nd of May 1945, even if only for a few days. In November of 1946, France formally suggested to the Allied command to blow up what was in their eyes a symbol of German aggression. Britain and the US disagreed with this idea, so instead the French dismantled 3 of the 4 reliefs and took them to Paris. They were formally returned by the French President François Mitterrand as part of the 750-year celebration of Berlin's existence in 1987. In 2010, the column and the statue were extensively renovated. If you're willing to climb up 285 stairs, you can enter the column for a small fee and enjoy one of Berlin's most beautiful and stunning views. Next up on our list is the Hermann monument in the very pretty Teutoburg forest. The statue is supposed to depict Arminius, the commander of the Germanic tribes that inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Romans in the year 9 CE. It is 26 meters tall and therefore the biggest statue in all of Germany. For a few years, it was even the highest statue in the Western world, before the French decided to claim the record for themselves. The planning process for it actually began multiple decades before the unification of Germany, namely in the 1830s. You see, after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the figure of Arminius as the uniter of the Germanic tribes against the Romans became very popular among academic circles. The young artist and architect Ernst von Bandel was one of the first to suggest a monument for this mythical figure, and he determined that a mountain in the Teutoburg forest to the south of Detmold would be the perfect location for it. He believed that this is where the battle was fought, even if it probably actually happened about 70 kilometers away, near the city of Osnabrück. After the Prince of Lippe gave his blessing for the project, construction began in 1838. However, due to financial problems and political turmoil, the statue remained unfinished for a very long time until Kaiser Wilhelm I became interested in the project. In 1871, the Reichstag agreed to the donation of a hefty sum of money, and the Kaiser generously donated almost the exact same amount. With the financial support, the Hermann monument could finally be opened in 1875. But why this sudden interest? You see, after the Franco-Prussian War, the image of France as Germany's arch-enemy was a very popular one. Many parallels were drawn up between the struggle of the Germanic tribes against the Romans and the Germans against the French. After all, the French speak a Latin language, so it just makes sense. The statue is purposefully looking towards the west in a very threatening manner. It was also commonly interpreted as a symbolic representation of Bismarck's Kulturkampf against the Pope in Rome. For decades, the statue remained a popular meeting place for right-wing and nationalist groups, and to some it became a place of pilgrimage. Today, obviously, the statue still stands, but its meaning has shifted greatly. Arminius is no longer angrily raising his sword against France, but kindly greeting it instead. The monument has become a very popular tourist attraction with a spectacular view, a climbing park, a restaurant, and an open-air cinema. If you want, the city of Detmold will even give you the chance to get married there.
Thüringer Bratwürste esse ich so gern. Sie schmecken, Damen und Herren, ein jeder mag sie gern.
Let's talk about what is probably the most scenic monument of today, the Kyffhäuser monument in Thuringia. Germany's third largest monument stands in the Kyffhäuser Mountains and offers a spectacular view. It celebrates Kaiser Wilhelm I and turns him into a sort of hero figure. After the death of said Kaiser, hundreds of statues were erected in his honor. This can be attributed to Wilhelm II, who wanted to turn his grandfather into a legend. But the monument on the Kyffhäuser was created by a private association, the War Veterans Federation. After they had managed to secure the necessary funds, the famous architect Bruno Schmitz was tasked with designing a monument for their beloved Kaiser. But why were the Kyffhäuser Mountains chosen as the location? In the 19th century, a medieval legend surrounding the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa began to find increasing popularity. The legend claimed that Barbarossa didn't actually drown in the River Salef during the Third Crusade, but instead rests inside the Kyffhäuser Mountains in an eternal sleep, just waiting to come back to life and restore the empire to its former glory or something. Parallels were drawn up between Kaiser Wilhelm I and the legendary Barbarossa to demonstrate that the German Empire was indeed the legitimate successor to the Holy Roman Empire. The construction was finished in June of 1896 in the presence of the Kaiser and other rulers of smaller German states. The monument had been built on top of an old castle ruin from the 11th century, which further solidifies the claim of a continued succession. When you enter the monument, you will be greeted not by one, but by two statues. On the bottom you have a sandstone sculpture of Barbarossa with his long beard, who seems to have just woken up from his nap. Above him, Kaiser Wilhelm I proudly sits atop of his horse. Both statues are attached to a 57-meter tall red sandstone tower. You can climb it, and after 247 steps, you'll have reached the top and will be rewarded with a very nice view. In summer of 2004, a gastronomer found a 5-meter tall statue of former President/General Paul von Hindenburg buried right next to the monument. The statue had been put up there in 1939 by the Kyffhäuser Association in honor of the deceased president. It probably got buried by Soviet soldiers when they had reached the area in 1945, but because no one really knows what to do with him now, von Hindenburg is still lying on the ground to this very day. While the monument is now essentially nothing but a tourist attraction, it still serves as a rallying point for the far right, sadly. Until 2020, the monument was the annual meeting place of the now dissolved far-right faction called Der Flügel within the right-wing Alternative for Germany party. Der Flügel was led by the former history teacher and probably the most controversial party member, Bernd Höcke. Höcke has been classed as a right-wing extremist in 2020 and has since then been under close government surveillance. No wonder, as he keeps spouting blatantly racist, ableist, anti-Semitic, revisionist, homophobic and pro-Russian nonsense. So, the whole deal essentially. During one of these meetings, Bernd Höcke has said this about the monument. In the cave of the Kyffhäuser mountain an emperor sleeps, to wake one day with his faithful, and when the need is greatest, to restore the glory of the empire. Dear friends, drawing inner strength from myths has always been helpful in times of change, and we are undoubtedly living in a turning time again. And this new myth will decide whether we not only experience and suffer this turning point, but whether we actively shape it. Alright, now enough about the wannabe Goebbels, let's talk about the next monument.
Qui peut sauver la nation? Un seul nom, Napoléon. Impossible n'est pas français, et ça, il nous le promet. Pas vraiment l'homme de ces dames, mais l'homme des champs de bataille.
The monument to the Battle of the Nation stands in the southern part of Leipzig and is Germany's highest monument, with a whopping 91 meters. It is supposed to commemorate the Battle of Leipzig, at which Napoleon suffered one of his worst defeats at the hands of a multinational coalition consisting of Russia, Austria, Sweden, Prussia and other German states. Only a few months after the battle took place, the nationalist poet Ernst Arndt demanded that a monument should be built to celebrate the victory. Many artists and architects brought forth their ideas, but to no avail. Saxony's financial situation didn't allow it, as well as the opposition of many German rulers to this nationalistic monument. In April of 1894, the German Patriots League was founded by the architect Clemens Thieme. Thieme had made the construction of a monument in Leipzig his life goal, and he was determined to fulfill it. To a degree, the money came from various gymnastics, singers and soldiers' clubs, but the lion's share was financed by gambling addicts. The state of Saxony had allowed Thieme to conduct lotteries across the country, and he used this opportunity 23 times. Kaiser Wilhelm II only donated a small and symbolic amount because even to him the Patriots League went a bit over the top with their worldview. After the money was collected, the city of Leipzig provided a huge plot of land and the construction could begin. It would take just about 15 years to finish this colossal stone pile, as some locals like to call it. Before you go inside, you will be greeted by an oversized statue of the Archangel Michael, who stands there firmly with his shield and swords. Above him it says, God with us. When you've made it inside, you will find yourself in a huge crypt with 16 statues of warriors. On the second floor there are 4 statues, each supposed to represent one of the 4 virtues every German supposedly possesses, those being bravery, strength of faith, people strength, and sacrifice. So, as you can see, even if the battle was fought and won by a very international coalition, the monument only celebrated Germany's involvement in it. It does not surprise them that no Russian, French, Swedish or Austrian diplomats bothered to show up to the grand opening. After the First World War, annual celebrations were still being held in front of the monument to remember the victims of the Napoleonic and the Great War. It also became a rallying spot for right-wingers and other enemies of the Weimar Republic. Under the National Socialist dictatorship, the site was increasingly used as a mythological rallying ground, and even the Führer visited it numerous times. When the Second World War broke out, the rallies became smaller and smaller and were finally called off in 1944. There were plans to blow up the monument after it had become a part of the socialist GDR, but in the end the ruling party SED decided against it. Instead, the victory was celebrated as a combined Russian-German achievement. Under the GDR, the monument lost essentially all of its initial nationalistic meaning, and became more of a tourist attraction or a place to hang out. To this day, it has kept the status, and the very questionable intentions behind it are, luckily, very irrelevant nowadays. Alright then, dankeschön for watching. It was a bit of a different video, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. If you did, a like and a subscribe would be well appreciated. A very special thank you goes out to A Cup of Tea, Drix and Tristan Kriegsmann for their generous support over on Ko-Fi. You are awesome. If you want to join these wonderful people, maybe consider supporting me as well. Anyway, have a very wonderful day and see you next time.